This photo shows Melora Rivera hiding on her roof from a home intruder, while she calls the cops. The intruder can be seen behind her. Melora was in her bed when she heard an intruder knocking down the door. She immediately jumped out of bed and onto the roof and proceeded to call 911. She states that she did not want to have to confront him, not knowing what his intentions were. Melora also said that she could not have safely jumped off the roof since it was more than 20 feet high. This photo was taken by a bystander just before the police quickly arrived. They helped Melora get down and the intruder to surrender. The photo was posted to Twitter, where the intruder was identified as Hicks, a well-known homeless person. It turns out that Hicks had also wandered into the yard of one of Melora's neighbors and had the cops called on him. This photo shows the face of Jerome Brudos, accidentally captured in a mirror, placed beneath the hoisted dead body of one of his victims whom he photographed. Jerome, also known as the lust killer and shoe fetish slayer, was responsible for the murder of 4 young women between 1968 and 1969. He was also a necrophiliac and had on several occasions cut off the breasts and feet of his victims to satiate his fetish for women's feet and demonstrate his domination. Jerome abducted the 4 women and strangled them in his basement and garage on separate occasions in order to satisfy his fetishes, before disposing of their bodies in the Willamette River. A local fisherman discovered one of the bodies, and an underwater search and rescue unit was dispatched and found another body near that. The bodies were identified and linked to the same perpetrator since they had been bound by the same electrical flex and weighted down with core components. The police questioned the fellow students of the victims, which eventually led them to Jerome, who was subsequently arrested. This photo shows a life-size doll that looks slightly off. While that may look like a doll, it's actually the mummified corpse of a girl turned into a doll by Anatoly Moskvin. Anatoly is a former linguist and historian who had a weird hobby of digging up the graves of little girls and women. He would then mummify their bodies before dressing them up and placing them in poses around his house, with some even having music boxes placed inside them. He would do things such as speak to them, watch TV with them, and celebrate their birthdays. Anatoly, who was living with his parents, was arrested after 26 mummified bodies of girls and women, aged 3 to 29, were discovered at his home. Anatoly's parents were unaware that these dolls were made from corpses, believing them to be just normal dolls. When asked about his motive, Anatoly said that he sympathized with the dead children and wanted to find a way for them to be brought back to life. He would sleep on the graves of the girls as a way to communicate with their spirits and determine whether they wanted to be brought back to life or not. He also said that the reason he turned them into dolls was to provide them with functional bodies that weren't ugly or decayed, so that when they were brought back to life, they would feel comfortable and happy. Anatoly was charged with the crime of grave desecration and sentenced to prison. However, after psychiatric evaluation, he was transferred to a psychiatric clinic due to suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, deeming him unfit for trial. This photo was taken at the exact moment that electricity passed through the body of convicted murderer Ruth Snyder. Chicago Tribune photographer Tom Howard snuck a miniature plate camera by strapping it to his ankle, which he used to secretly take the photo. Ruth Snyder was convicted of the murder of her husband Albert Snyder, for which she was sentenced to the electric chair. Ruth got married at 20 to Albert, an artist 13 years her senior, from whom she gave birth to their daughter. A few years later, Ruth began an affair with Henry Judd Gray, a married salesman. It was then when she started to plan the murder of her husband, enlisting the help of Henry, who reluctantly agreed. It is unclear what Ruth's motives were, with some claiming that it was due to her husband preferring a slave fiancé, Jesse Gushard, over her. Others claim that Albert was both mentally and emotionally abusive, triggered by the fact that his wife bore him a daughter, not a son. On the 20th of March 1927, Henry and Ruth murdered Albert, using a picture wire rags soaked in chloroform and sash weights, staging the murder as a burglary. Both Ruth and Henry were convicted of the murder and sentenced to death. This photo shows Christopher Wilder, also known as the Beauty Queen Killer, staring at Michelle Korfman at a cover model competition in Las Vegas in 1984. Michelle's body was found near a Southern California roadside rest stop the following month, having been killed by Christopher. Christopher would only go after women he found attractive. He would lure them in by promising to take their pictures. He was responsible for the murder of at least 8 women, whom he would also torture and rape. Christopher died in a shootout with the police. This photo shows the mask worn by notorious sex offender Edward Paisnell, also known as the Beast of Jersey. Between 1957 and 1971, Edward would enter the homes of women and children wearing this rubber mask and attack them. He was captured and sentenced to 30 years in prison on 13 counts of and assault. This photo shows Depression-era gangster and one of the leaders of the Barker Karpus gang, Alvin Karpus. Alvin had his fingerprints removed by underworld physician Joseph Moran in 1934. This resulted in Alvin not being able to obtain a Canadian passport due to his barely recognizable prints. Fingerprint mutilation, which is a practice almost as old as fingerprint identification, is used by criminals and such to avoid being identified and linked to their arrest records and warrants. Many different methods are used, ranging from cutting and sanding them off to burning them with cigarettes or using acid. Sometimes people prefer the assistance of underworld physicians, as in this case.